My guest today is Professor Jessica Stern. Jessica is a colleague here at the Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University, and I'm going to ask her what she thinks the future of extremism might look like in a post-COVID world.
We've seen a big increase in the role of white nationalists in the United States, but one of the interesting developments is the beginnings of a global collaboration, sort of like what happened with Al-Qaeda. When I think about how Al-Qaeda spread, if I think about what happened in, for example, Chechnya, which was a nationalist disagreement between Chechnya and Russia that Tolstoy wrote about, but the Chechen separatists realized that if they signed on to the Al-Qaeda movement, the jihadi movement, they could attract global fighters, they could attract more money. But we see something similar, quite remarkably, happening in the dispute between Russia and Ukraine, where global white nationalists or far-right nationalists are flocking remarkably to both sides of that conflict. And I think we may see more of that.
This may be an unfair question, but what do you think that while we are all focused on COVID-19, what do you think extremist groups are thinking or doing?
Chaos is very good for extremists across ideologies, and they are exploiting the chaos. If you want to know what are they doing in respect to the virus, they are involved in the movement to fight against the lockdown. We know the Boogaloo Boys, which is a amorphous hard right group, mostly hard right, pro-gun group, and some members are white supremacists. They're showing up at anti-lockdown protests, as is usually the case. The extremists across ideologies will take advantage of this chaos. Another thing we see is that when people spend a lot of time online, they are vulnerable, especially young people. They are vulnerable. They can go down the sort of wormhole of extremism and get more and more extreme in their views. And so it's a really, unfortunately, I think it's a good moment for extremists across ideologies.
Any thoughts on the big organized terrorist groups, things like ISIS?
So far, they're organizations such as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, they are doing two things. They're blaming it on the West in various ways, and it's a punishment of the West in the way they describe it. And also, to the extent they can, they are providing social welfare services in order to further recruit. So extremists do exploit chaos and crises of all kinds. And so the more the government cannot provide services to people, the better it is for extremists. They're truly excellent at taking advantage of state fragility, poor governance. We know this from the history of terrorism around the world. And I think what's so shocking about what's going on now is that we see some of the indicators of state fragility that we normally associate with Yemen or Afghanistan. We're seeing some of those indicators in the West, especially in response to the virus. And I think we will continue to see extremists take advantage of that weakness and fragility.
Finally, any advice for those who work on counter-extremism?
Terrorists want us to overreact. That is the dream of the extremist. And so, as an American, I think more about American counterterrorism policy. I think we have to be really wary of overreacting to the psychological threat these groups pose, because that's really kind of falling into the trap.